Welcome to the In-Betwixt and In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping middle managers and their supervisors embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence, wherever you are on your leadership journey. I'm Josh Hugo, one of your co-hosts, joined today by my good friend, John Clark. John, how are you this morning?
Great. In the words of Denzel Washington from Training Day, my man, how are you? How's it going?
That is a great movie.
It is a great movie.
That is a really good movie.
Yeah.
I'm not a movie rewatcher, except for a handful of movies. And I would say Training Day is right there. American Gangster too. Is that also a Denzel Washington movie?
It is. He had his bad guy era there American Gangster, he was very this like, I like him, but he's bad. I mean, right? If I recall that one. And then Training Day, he's just kind of evil. But I kind of like that about Denzel Washington because he feels like he should just be a Marvel hero a lot of the times. But then he's just this complex. I loved him. Yeah, I love it. But Ethan Hawke in that movie just is kind of living his life the way I feel like I'm living mine, but just in suburbia, except he's actually out there in drug fights and stuff. So.
Well, yeah. And maybe this is our branch off podcast is like reviewing Denzel Washington movies.
Leadership through movies. That could be our angle, right? We're the leadership movie guys. That would be, toxic.
Honestly, that would probably, if we actually knew anything about movies and had some Hollywood credibility, which I don't, as far as I know, I don't. I know you
have
don't.
To gain it, you just fake it till you make it, man.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's good to be here. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we also will be making an introduction to David here in just a moment. Before that, just a reminder for our listeners to download our podcast wherever you get the podcast at. If you feel so inclined to give us a review, we would love to hear your feedback and really appreciate whatever is shared, questions, comments, anything that helps us to make this more valuable for you. And for those who do also listen to this and think that our conversations are interesting enough for you to keep listening, pass it along to somebody else. We'd love to see the reach of this continue to grow. And without any further ado, really excited to have a guest on our show today. A man by the name of David Boelens. David and I met somewhat recently over the interwebs through LinkedIn and have found ourselves in places of intersection much more often as of recent. So really grateful to have you on the show today, David.
Glad to be on.
Yeah, and excited for our conversation, just for our listeners to have a little background. And this is always the part that sounds a little like I'm just going to read it. So David, you can certainly elaborate, but David's currently is the leader of the Integrated Talent Development Organization, or of the Integrated Talent Development Organization, charged with attracting, developing, empowering, and retaining the Raytheon operations, quality, and supply chain workforce. He's held many roles across his career in operations, supply chain, as well as IT, and also served as a cavalry officer in the U.S. Army. And so we're really grateful to have you here today, David. And I would love for you to actually just build on that introduction and just tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and your experience as it pertains to leadership and management.
Among one of our more impressive bios we've seen so far. So really cool to have you on, David.
Well, it was a mouthful for sure. We like our we like our acronyms, and I've been in a bunch of different orgs that to fully describe everything we do, it's very long, and so we shorten it in a whole word sandwich. So I started out my career as a cavalry officer. So what that ended up being in terms of leadership, right? Since we're talking leadership today, I was very lucky to be my first role out of the Army. I was actually what's called an executive officer. So I was second in charge of a cavalry troop, which really meant I was just managing like our mortar platoon, mortar section, as well as really making sure like our platoons, our troops were fully supplied, in theater and prior to theater and post theater moves. I got to be a platoon leader. Honestly, the best leadership experience in my life. I call it like my doctorate in leadership from the University of Mosul and Tal Afar. I got to spend 15 months. This was in 2006, 2007, so pre-surge. If you're familiar with history, during the surge, it's a really difficult time in Iraq, but I had some outstanding outstanding young men who were with me, and we got to do a lot of interesting things. And really, truly, it's just a lot of gray area that they don't teach you in school. You can't learn except through experience with leadership. And then I decided like that was enough for me. And then I got out and I went back to school. Got a master's in supply chain and went into an Army buddy of mine was like, hey, you should do this leadership development program with a company called Raytheon. And so I got to do a variety of different roles and different operations and supply chain leadership functions, logistics, subcontracts management, production control, all that different sort of stuff, different sites, different people. And through that, I got to learn there's a lot just based on different locations, different cultures, different modes of operation, all that sort of stuff. And then, so I was an individual contributor for quite some time, which was kind of
Nice, I bet.
great.
Yeah.
It was nice, but it was also kind of grinding on me because I'm like, man,
Oh,
I just love leading people.
mm.
Oh yeah, and I forgot. I also did one thing, a short summer between Army and going back to school. I was a construction manager for a while. So
Okay. Okay.
yeah, did that. Had a large team there, but going on, did that for probably a decade. Different roles in ops, supply chain, IT, a lot of indirect matrix leadership,
Mhm.
influence, and then 2020 happened. Started to get more roles, more unique opportunities, and then I uh where our leaders were like, hey, we don't really have a lot of stuff within ops and supply chain, quality, learning and development, talent development. Would that be something of interest of you? And so I said, sure, right? And so since then, I've grown this team over the past 6+ years and really had the honor and privilege of like leading some very talented people within that team. And then, of course, right, indirectly throughout a larger organization. So it's been
Yeah.
fun.
That's an awesome journey. I'm actually curious about the very first steps when you were in the Army. When you came in right out of the gates, were you already an officer leading others, or was that something that, like, what led you to that position? And tell us how you got into that role initially.
Yeah, so my undergrad, I was at Texas A&M, which is a senior military college as well.
Okay.
One of, I think, six, right? You got like Virginia Tech, Texas A&M, VMI, Citadel, Norwich, and I'm forgetting one other. But so we had a large core of cadets, and so through that process, I commissioned as an officer. And so once I commissioned, I was a second lieutenant. Went through all my, kind of armor officer basic courses and that sort of stuff. And then so, about 6 months in, hey, you go to your unit and you're in charge, and it's very, it's intimidating. You have a
Yeah.
lot of the people under your charge is they're very senior non-commissioned officers, all the way down to your brand new privates. And these guys know what they're doing, and there's a reason why, as a lieutenant, young lieutenant, one of the many things I learned through that experience is like, hey, you have 2 ears, one mouth. Keep your ears open, mouth shut. Listen to your senior
Yeah.
NCOs, listen to that experience, right? And have discernment and judgment.
Hmm. So you were leading people older than you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. People who at the time I thought they were like really old, like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like 28, 26, and even me as 23, 22 at the time, you think you're old. And because you have 18-year-olds, maybe even a
Yeah.
17-year-old at time, but you're really pretty young. But it's a great experience because you're learning through, I mean, real life, real failures, real successes, and that learning curve is exponential. And sometimes, you can't have that length of time, especially when you're in combat. That learning time is very short. So
David, can you? I want to talk about platoon leadership. You said that's where you got your
sure.
PhD in it, and the reason. I mean, one thing I want to ask you is, I think a lot of people, there's a lot of literature from people who were military leaders about
Yeah.
leadership, right? And sometimes it's all really great, but I think sometimes folks are like, okay, what I'm doing is not life and death. It's a very different form of leadership.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear from you as a person who led a platoon, but has continued to apply those in your leadership journey after, I think, the intensity of combat. What did you learn from there, and how does that apply to the way you lead and think about leadership development today?
So I'll tell you, like, there's so many different unique stories that I've just, again, I want to be very clear that, like, I was very blessed to have the NCOs and the soldiers underneath me who were just outstanding. The leaders above me who poured into me, certainly learned a lot from all of that experience. One takeaway, John, that I had that was really, I think, a shift for me, and I'll tell you a story. I won't name the name of the soldier, but we'll call him Private First Class T.
T.
And so when I was first in as an executive officer, so again, second in charge of this troop, had this section, and as part of this section, you have to manage a tactical operations center, a TOC. So when we went out to train at the National Training Center in Fort Irwin, California, in preparation for our deployment to Iraq, we had to manage this radio center. And I had these different folks, right? 24/7, you have to monitor the radio, you have to relay traffic, you trying to make sure people are doing proper radio etiquette. Sounds simple, but for some it can be difficult. And I had one Private First Class T who, people would call in on the radio and he could hear them on the radio, but because it wasn't directed directly to him, right? Like, let's say our call sign for that talk was, Annihilator 5.
Okay.
Right?
Good one.
And so he would, but because it wouldn't say Annihilator 5, he'd say, well, that's not for me. It's not mine. I'm going to let it go. And so people would call and maybe they couldn't get to the area they're trying to relay to just because the length of the signal, and they would have difficulty. And so it was a little bit frustrating because we were like, hey man, if you hear it and you're not hearing any response, it's up to you to take initiative, to take leadership, to get on the phone and then relay, like, hey, this is Annihilator 5. Let me try to relay for you. Fast forward a year later. I'm a platoon leader. I'm in Iraq. I'm going from a city. We're in Nineveh province. And I was in Tal Afar at the time. And I was moving my scout platoon from Tal Afar to Mosul overnight on this route called Route Santa Fe, I think. And it was a very dangerous route. Literally, you go to your intelligence officer and you say, hey, what's the best time window for me to travel on this road where I'm not going to get hit by a improvised explosive device or a car bomb or whatever. And I remember at that time, it was like, well, it's basically 98% chance you're going to get hit regardless of time. So we went at night at about, let's say 1 a.m. and we're driving, and sure enough, the insurgents, they're not dumb people. By that time in the Iraq War, all the dumb ones had long gone. The smart ones were left. And so they had hit us in an area that we had no radio communication with anybody. And they knew that. And they hit us with an IED. And it was, I'm not going to lie, it's a little bit scary. And so I'm trying to call up and I'm trying to call anybody. And I'm trying to call the nearest, what I believed was the nearest tactical operations center of a sister battalion. Like, hey, we've been hit. We're still moving. We're fine, but we're moving. Just want to let you know, we couldn't radio anybody, and it was really very, very, very difficult. But what was cool is in that moment, after a couple radio calls, I heard a voice on my radio saying, "Hey, this is so and so. Let me relay you to Ghost Talk." And that one individual who was up manning the radio at 2 a.m. at night at a combat outpost was, in fact, Private First Class T. So all that to say, to shape like my leadership philosophy is like in those times where it's not life and death, where it's not like it's okay to fail. You actually want people to fail. You want to fail often. You want to do everything because you never know whether it's months, years down the road that same individual is going to take those lessons that you try to teach them or lessons from those experiences, and that it's going to help you. And so that's been kind of like, in a nutshell, my philosophy on leadership. Like, you can't afford not to pour into people. You can't afford not to take your time and like serve them first before you serve your needs, because you never know.
I love that.
Yeah. David, maybe just sticking on, I think that when we last talked, you shared a little bit about, or we maybe briefly talked about the nature of development and leadership development in in the military. And depending on who you talk to, there's a lot of people who would conclude that the military's approach to leadership and development is one of the foremost approaches really anywhere. What would you say some of the most valuable parts of the culture of leadership development within the military, within the U.S. Army, have stuck with you the most since your time in service?
I think so what's interesting and what I've had the benefit of being on both, commercial side and then the military side. And I'll say there's actually pros and cons to both. I do think that the military is stronger in leadership development, but they're also not held necessarily to a budget,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Yeah.
Right? You can afford that. You can say, hey, we're going to spend X amount of we're just going to keep doing this till you get it right. Whereas maybe in the commercial world, you can't afford that. It's overhead, right? There's costs associated, all that sort of stuff. What I will say, though, I think the biggest strength of that side of the house in terms of military development is, or for leadership development, is probably two things that stick out to me. Number one, and by the way, again, military, it's got a lot of poor leaders too, right?
Yeah.
There's no monopoly on good leadership any sector anywhere.
It's a good point. Yeah, it's a great point.
So with all that said, though, some of the strengths on the military side, and in my case, on the Army side, that I was able to witness was the connection of values. So here's one example. They came up, and this was at the time I was still in, they came up with it, and at the time I was like, kind of cheesy, but it sticks with you. You learn it. Is leadership was actually became an acronym, right? We talked about acronyms earlier. So it stood for the values, the Army values: loyalty, duty, respect, self-service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. Leadership. So connecting that with your values, leadership, that's a good thing. And then I think another concept that's more prevalent in the military that I'm seeing start to kind of seep in a little bit. I know at least I try to do with my team, but I'm seeing it seep into more businesses, is what's called leaders intent, which is not telling, right, you guys hey, this is exactly what you need to do and how you need to do it and all the steps, which is helpful, but saying, hey, look, at the end of the day, this is what my intent is, right? We're gonna, in the Army, might be we're gonna defend this town to enable future offensive operations, right? So what does that mean? Well, hey, in defending this town, maybe I don't want to blow up the bridge, right? Because we're going to use it for future operations. In the business world, leader intent can mean a total different variety of things too. Hey, we want to deploy this application in order to do X, Y, Z.
Where do folks go wrong with leader intent? Because some to your point, set your intent, but I think sometimes everybody has an intent.
Yeah.
But where do they go wrong with it?
I think for me, what I've found is that there's sometimes a fundamental misunderstanding of what intent is. Right? Sometimes they're not specific enough on their intent. Yes, it can be high level, but you got to have some basic elements of intent.
So when you said not just we're going to save the town, but hey, we're also going to use it
in
later.
order to.
Yeah.
That's a key phrase there. In order to, so the why. Why are we doing this? I think that's one big thing. I think the other thing is that when you set intent, it doesn't mean then after you set intent, you give a laundry list of every single minutia that you have to do. Now, plans are good. Plans are absolutely good, but when plans go to crap, right, you have to, that's what intent is there for. So that, the lowest member of my organization understands the why we're doing this, and they may come up with an amazing solution to achieve that end intent that maybe, I hadn't seen, and that's okay.
Yeah, that ties really well to what we've been talking about on and off this podcast for the last 6 or 7 months about the idea, paint the outcome you want to get to, but at some level you have to trust and develop your people to be able to accomplish that without micromanaging that. And I'm not a military historian, but, from what I have read is I might be wrong about this, David, so feel free to correct this, but I also believe that represents a bit of a shift in the way that our military thought about strategy from the early, couple hundred years ago. I mean, we just picture the Revolutionary War, if you just line up and you walk towards the other side and start shooting, as military techniques and strategies have evolved, it really became about the outcome here is to do this. And guerrilla warfare, the way things changed in Vietnam and the way that like typical approaches to battle had to look different, that the military approach to training people to be adaptable and adaptive and flexible is something that maybe people don't always associate with military strategy, but it really sounds like that leader intent is essentially an extension of that idea of like, here's where we're going and why. We may have to get there, with plan C or plan D, or maybe a plan we haven't even thought of. And I think that's a really interesting, I'm just thinking out loud. I think that's really
Yeah.
interesting to hear.
Yeah. I could nerd out on this
Yeah.
particular topic as a former Army guy. If anybody of my Army buddies are watching, right, they know way more than I do at this point. They've been in still for a bit, but military historian and everything. And you just read some of those books and from some of the, like, as an example, the folks who really started some of this stuff, like Heinz Guderian, right, like Achtung Panzer and some other things, right, like the thought process in terms of like, hey, when you're deploying units and you have objectives, right? Like, hey, at a certain point, it comes down to that young platoon leader or that tank commander or that troop captain. And we see that in all successful militaries. You see that actually in Ukraine a lot, is that decentralized command and the intent there, which is a total reversal of maybe where they had been in the early 2000s, right? Which was more of a kind of a Russian model where it's like, hey, very top down, hierarchical, hopefully your commander is still around. So, but that there's so much there and so many more like better experts than me, obviously, to talk about all that. But it's really truly fascinating, and I think it can be applied to leadership, to learning, to talent development, all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah.
I find it
Might be a pivot. Yeah. John, do you want to take the next one? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say too, it's just interesting to see how, Josh, you've seen this too, without us prompting it, the idea of tying things to your values also continually comes up. We talked about this with branding and accountability. I mean, Michael Sykes, when he's talking about kind of an equity lens, and then, here when we're talking about leadership in intense kind of military moments,
Yeah.
if you're grounded in values and what we believe, you continue to do that too. So I find that really fascinating. David, do you have any other thoughts on that, or kind of how values really fit into this, even in these tense moments?
Values and principles. Like even my team today, when I have any new person come on my team, I don't talk to them about our strategy. I don't talk to them about our goals for the year. I don't talk to them about anything. I just tell them like, hey, if you forget nothing else, here's some key values or principles that we have. And so just remember that.
Yeah.
Because again, the forgetting curve, right? If you guys have seen anything on the forgetting curve, we're told that like within the first hour, people forget 50% of what you told them. Within the first day, it's 70%, and within the first week, it's 90%.
Yeah.
So if you put that all into perspective, then you really forces you to say what is truly important for this one individual to remember, right? And it's the values, it's the principles.
That's good.
That
Yeah, let's get into Raytheon a little bit, because you've talked about as a platoon leader, that story with T was great. And in that way, we're talking about you as somewhat of in this context anyway, a manager, right, of a team of individual contributors. You're in a position of training other managers now. Tell us about that. Like, what's that shift look like? How do you go about that? And yeah, how's that? Yeah. And just like, how does that continue to evolve for you?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest thing is where we've had to focus is like you definitely have to with any large company, any large matrix organization, you kind of got to let go of your ego and say, I can't control it all. I can't be the bottleneck. I can't do like it's just impossible. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are responsible for ultimately for learning and development. However, right? Just because we're responsible for it doesn't mean that I am the expert, nor my team the expert on, let's say, how to be an industrial engineer, or how to be a buyer, or how to be a material program manager, or how to be a production operations manager, or whatever those roles are. Even if we've experienced those roles, maybe it's not the latest and greatest of information. And so having, I think, just the first step, the intellectual humility to say, I don't know everything, number one. And then number two, it's like, but what am I the expert in, right? Well, it's learning and development. Okay, now how do I marry those two together? Well, maybe a first step is just understanding who those experts are. How do you organize it? And then equipping those folks with maybe some of the key fundamental stuff that your team is experts in to kind of make content, maybe knowledge, more available to the wider masses. And so that kind of ties back to one of the principles that like my team has is we want people to, all of our learning, all of our development to be personal. So it matters to John, it matters to Josh, but it's also got to be scalable. So it matters not just to John and Josh, but to thousands of their coworkers. And then it's got to be sustainable, right? Personal, scalable, and sustainable. Because anybody can do one. Some people can do two. It's very hard, incredibly hard to do all three.
Yeah.
Right? Anybody can do a surge effort and deploy training or leadership development to tens of thousands of people once. Now do it every 6 months, every year,
Yeah, right.
every 5 years. It's hard.
David, when you think about the role of systems, when you're talking about a big organization, right? You've been part of two big
Yeah.
organizations. A lot of what John and I spend time on the podcast is talking about like not so much systems directly, although it's very much core to how we believe you do this work well. We often talk more about once you're in the moment with another leader, what does it look like to deliver a difficult message or to lead with influence? But zooming it out a little bit, so we have listeners who might be in charge of a team of 50 people, maybe they're leaders of organizations with 5,000 people in them.
Yeah.
Depending on their role, being part of an organization that's not just a small startup team of 2 or 3 people, how would you be advising other leaders to think about the role of systems when it comes to scaling out talent development systems, people
Yeah.
development systems?
So I think that's a great question. And I would say the one thing that I've learned over time, and so my journey in the past 5 years, right? Like we went from, I would say my team was very small. Now it's relatively big. That scope that we were in charge of at first, relatively small. Now I would say pretty gosh darn big. Without getting the specific numbers. What I would say is that one thing that people miss on systems is a lot of times as a manager or a leader who's trying to implement it, you are thinking through the perspective of you and your team. You are not thinking through the perspective of the people who are going through that system or the people who have to interact with that system.
Yeah.
So here's an example. It is very tempting to set up a rotation program or some sort of development program and think, how can we make this to where we can make it as easy as possible to scale, to do what we need to, exactly what we said, personal, scalable, sustainable. And we can blow this and we can, it looks great on paper and we can get 100 people through because we've optimized everything from my team perspective. I have seen it happen where it looks great on paper, not my team, other teams. It looks great on paper, it's going to go, but I can tell you it will not do well. And here's why.
Okay.
It's because they don't consider maybe the hiring managers, as an example, who actually have to hire the talent out of that program, right? They are key stakeholders. So if you had a program A who says, hey, you know what, we're going to help you with the interview. You can participate if you'd like, but we're going to help you with the selection. You can have a say in that selection. Hey, you're going to have all the data you need on that person, whether or not they're a good fit, whatever. We'll be flexible with you on the start and end times. Or, hey, you're not going to know who you're getting. You're going to have a multi-year sign up for multiple people. You won't know the talent. And right, so if you're in that hiring manager position, you're going to be like, man, I'd just rather hire a full-time person. I don't want to deal with this rotation program mess. I would need to have some buy-in on these people. And so what you'll see is that talent program, even though it looks great, the systems are optimized, they didn't consider some of these stakeholders. And so then that kind of starves that program bit by bit, year over year over year. And then eventually, right, it's like, what went wrong? We had a perfect system. So I think just understanding all the stakeholders is super important.
Can you talk to us? Oh, go on, John. Well, I was just going to ask, can you talk to us a little bit about the personal versus the scalable / sustainable part of this, right? Like you say, those are our key things. I think it's where people get tripped up. They're like, we're trying to personalize everything. that makes it really hard to sustain and scale this. Or, hey, we're only, I think this is what you were talking about. We're just trying to scale and sustain and make this easy for us, but we forget about the people who are kind of part of
People.
the
Yeah.
program. Like,
Yeah.
how do you
It's one way
balance
or the
that?
other.
How do you keep that tension working, or how do you keep that dynamic? How do you keep it front of mind?
Yeah, so I think it is we always try to look through that lens. And that's one of the lenses that I tell all my team. It's like, hey, there's a lot of good ideas, but unless it checks all the boxes, you got to get back to the drawing pad to make sure that it's and I have to remind myself of that a lot too, because like I can come up with what I think is a great system. And then my team will call me out and say, hey, no, David, what you're talking about doesn't align to that value. So a specific thing. Let's say like we're responsible for internship program. What we'll do is maybe let's say round number. Let's say we'll have 100 interns. Okay, I can individually interview those folks. I can individually make sure they have the quality. I can do all that stuff. But like over the course of their internship, I cannot be in the room with them throughout all 2 months, 3 months. But what I can do, and this is what we were talking about earlier, is I can what is my role? Learning and development, talent development. But I'm not an expert in being a buyer, an industrial engineer, whatever. So here's an example of what we might do. Okay, intern. How do we know that the intern is going to be working with a hiring manager. We know that they're going to be working with their peers. Are there other talent programs that we can connect them with? So that like maybe the step in front of them, like the next step, if they were to be hired on and go into a rotation program, how do we connect that rotation program with our interns? How do we give those rotators leadership opportunities to pour into somebody just behind them? So now we make that connection. And now we say, hey, yeah, that intern, maybe they're in an industrial engineering role, but they're not getting any exposure to maybe being a buyer or being a material program manager. How do we connect them to people who are in those roles?
Yeah.
Just at once or twice during the year. So like what that does is if we can scale that system, again, think of it in terms of like pools of people, just connecting people. I don't have to do the personal stuff. I just have to connect those groups that maybe weren't connected before. And then I have to put a system in place to enable that free flow of knowledge between those different groups. And again, that can be student to intern to rotator to manager, manager to senior leader, right? All that sort of stuff. And then you just have the systems that make that hum. So, and then of course, then the sustainment piece, we look at that and we say, can we maintain that?
Yeah.
And usually that's where that all comes into play. Hopefully
Josh, that reminds me a lot about when Andrew Robinson was talking about this, like when we have these sit and get trainings, which is fine, like, but it's only going to give you 10 to 20% of the information. It's really about who are you connecting people with and how are they living within the organization itself, right? So yeah, that resonates quite a bit, David.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think as you're sharing that too, that phrase you shared earlier with us, the leader intent part, how do you find yourself and your team integrating that in practice? So you share that with us initially in the context of in combat in the military. How does this idea of leader intent apply to the work that you do with your team right now? And maybe even using that last example of scaling out this development system, where do you find yourself being really intentional about leader intent with your team?
Well,
yeah,
and the people who are in the program, because like you're just
Mm,
there to learn to be a leader, not necessarily like with like the mission in mind or
yeah.
yeah. So sorry.
yeah. So I and this is where sometimes I can get in my own way because I see all the things in my head and it's hard to get out in a very cohesive way. And I have an awesome team that helps me communicate very clearly. But what I'll say is I like to think of leaders' intent with rotators. It's like what's the end goal, right? That's the first thing. And so like we'll say, okay, for our folks, because we're responsible for ops, supply chain quality, we want somebody who goes through everything. They've got a wide variety of experiences, multifunctional experiences, so that when the opportunity comes to be a leader, they can step right in. They have that background, right? So we think about that. And then we say, well, how do we give them the experiences to make sure that we're doing that and yada, yada, yada. There's other more subtle things that we'll do, like, and I'll tie this to the value side, right? If like one of our values is for leadership, we want them to be able to take initiative. It is very tempting as a leadership talent development program manager to say, hey, Josh, you've just done this rotation. You're a buyer. We need you to move over to maybe sort of an operations role. And I'm going to help you do that. I'm going to connect you with people. That's very tempting because it's easy. It's easy on me. It reduces failure. I already have the connections. I've worked with this person a million times. I know they're going to always take you as a rotator or whatever. That's the easy button. But if my intent is to develop leaders, in that same conversation, I tell Josh, hey, Josh, do you care about your leadership development? Yeah, absolutely. What do you think you need next? Well, I think I need operations role. Okay. If you need an operations role, what's your plan to get one? Because I'm not here to help you. If you can't care enough about your career, I'm certainly not going to. And it's kind of, it sounds harsh. It sounds harsh, but what we find is that when they have ownership and they feel like there's no safety net, there is a safety net, but they feel like there's no safety net for them, that they are truly responsible. They have to take ownership of their career. They have to take initiative. They have to do stuff. Well, guess what? You're developing that leadership muscle, right? That like, hey, I must take initiative. I need to be proactive. I need to communicate. I need to, right? Like all that sort of stuff. Whereas I could compare that same individual with maybe somebody in a different type of style program where it's kind of spoon fed to them. And you're just, at the end of the day, you're just not getting the same, what I'll call product.
Yeah.
Out of the very similar programs.
Yeah. It's like you equate leadership development to like learning chemistry. You know what I mean? Like, well, if I just teach you some vocab words and I'm not saying chemistry is easy. I'm not getting at that.
Yeah.
But my point being is like, it's just a download of knowledge, but it's way more interpersonal and experiential and everything, right?
And the key to all of that is that I have to be, as the leader of that, okay with failure.
Yeah.
Like I got to be willing to say, you know what, that person didn't get placed, and I got a little bit of egg on my face because.
And I want to go back to that precise moment because it's so subtle, but it's like literally the difference between what we've talked about as with Andrew Robinson a few weeks ago of like the historical older version of management as opposed to this where we think the paradigm needs to shift, which is towards development, is you could say, you're going to go to this team. I know that you are ready for this. You're going there. Versus saying inside of your head, I believe that this person's really ready for that. But what I have to do is put it on them to ask, where do you think you need to go next as a leader? And one of those is taking that approach of taking the control for that person and essentially taking their responsibility away from them and choosing it for them. And on the flip side, that subtle difference in asking it as a question versus saying it as a suggestion or recommendation or just what will happen is the entire difference between how that person takes ownership or doesn't. And I think what you were getting at too, David, is my mind was going there too, is it's really hard to get out of your own way as the leader because it's easier. Maybe you really want that person to find success in that space. And it's not just about easy. It's about like, I want them to find success there. And I think this is where they should go. But it's the ability to catch yourself before you make that sort of statement and ask it as a question, a truly open-ended question. I think that just captures so beautifully like this strand of thinking that we've been infusing over our last, number of episodes.
Yeah, it's as long as again, tying it all back, right? Full circle moment. If you tie it back to those principles and your values as a company, as an organization, whatever, then it empowers you to make those questions. Like, hey, man, you know what our values are. You know that the objective of this particular program is to develop somebody with cross-functional experience, and you've only got this. What do you think is next, right?
Yeah.
It just makes it so easy. And hopefully you've done the vetting on the front end to make sure they kind of already have some of those innate qualities. But yeah, it's helping them grow that leadership muscle.
I got one more question, then I'll there when you have a lot of experience in development and doing this program, what do you think is one of the this be your early career leaders or just the type of managers that you see most common gap you see? Um, and I would even argue the hardest thing to teach people that sticks because sometimes we teach people things, but there's skills and gaps and things that just seem like they have a difficulty sticking. And have you found any ways of helping people to help make those skills stick?
Yeah. So I would say, I think especially with early career leaders, and it's not. This is not a broad. This is kind of a broad brush. It's not.
Yeah.
Everybody's got different things, but I would say across the board, uh, there's a healthy trepidation, a healthy resistance, a healthy maybe hesitance. I'll say to like speaking up
Mm.
or saying something. I know I encountered it when I first came from the army to, my company, and I'm like, I don't know, man, these people have been around for a couple of decades. They know what they're doing. But what I think a lot of our younger employees don't realize is they also bring something to the table. And so like I'll tell them is like as an example, we like one again principle that my team has is everybody has something to learn and everybody has something to share. And so like I'll talk to our young rotators or young interns or whatever, and I'll say, hey, I may be an expert on a lot of things, but I'll tell you one thing that you guys are an expert on within the first week, and it's our onboarding process. I went through it 15 years ago. My information is out of date.
Yeah.
But you just went through it, and you know the pros, the cons, where we can improve, all that stuff. How can we utilize that to make our organization, our company, right, our mission better?
Yeah.
And so we try to reset their mindset there, and then also tying it back to like as an example, just cohesive example. I keep trying to tie it just to the one internship program because we have dozens of different programs. But like the internship program, right? They may be afraid to like, I'm an intern, I don't want to reach out to people. Well, we say, well, we have a list of volunteers who are willing to talk to you, and as a matter of fact, you need to do at least 3 during the course of your internship. And here's the list of names, and they've already said they're expecting your call. And what we find is like they're timid at first, and I've gotten this feedback every year. I'm timid at first. I didn't know, but we had this list of volunteers, so I called them, and man, they were actually friendly. They actually wanted to answer my questions. They actually were helpful. And what blows my mind still to this day is usually when people go through that process of maybe the first volunteer or 2, they do way more than 3.
Yeah.
That was never the objective, was to just do 3. Our objective was to help teach them to reach out, be more confident, network, all that sort of stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, I can do this because it's just experience. And they have this safe place to fail.
Yeah. I mean, I just, that's not just about, oh, we tell them to do this thing and then we tell them, it's like, we know what we want them to do. And this goes back to your point of, and we're going to get them to the place that they're asking for it, or they're the one responsible for it, but we're going to lower barriers where we can.
Yeah.
Like, not that we're going to make it so easy that it's like obvious. Like,
They still got to do it.
yeah, you still got to do it, right? And that's such a good lesson for if you're a parent or if you're a teacher or if you're a leader of a small team of 3. It's just, okay, think about what you want people to do. Then it's on you to do what you need to do to lower some of those barriers, but then continue to keep it on them.
Yeah.
In your case, that's the ability to speak up and to ask questions and to bring your point of view. I think that's an incredible point.
Because at the end of the day, if I have a leader who's willing to speak up,
Yep.
ask questions, hey, I don't understand. I mean, my goodness,
Yeah.
what an awesome leader, right? Who once they have a couple of years of experience under the belt, like they're humble, they're always inquisitive, they're fast learners, right? But then also that same process, John, to your point, sometimes I get people who don't take that
Yeah.
opportunity. They don't ask, and I'm not going to force them. And that also tells us something about their
Sure.
leadership ability.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned those 2 principles. Whenever my mom would send me off to school as a younger kid, David, she would say, Josh, learn something today and share something today. And so that was kind of her well wish for the day. So I sometimes say that to my kids too. But it is, if
That's
you
a good
can
one.
learn something every day, and if you can share something every day,
Yeah.
that's a pretty damn good day, I would say. So David, to close us out, we like ending with this question when we have guests on, but love to hear from you. Who is a leader who inspires you, who formerly inspired you, and why?
Yeah, so I've been the benefactor of many, 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 many good leaders, and it's really this is a challenging question to me. Like I think of people like from the army, I think of people at my current company. I think of people both good and bad leaders. I think of famous people. One that comes to mind right now, the 2 that come to mind is like Colin Powell is a big leadership influence on me. One of his quotes is, hey, the moment your soldiers stop coming to you with issues is the moment, the day, and I'm paraphrasing, the day that you realize you have a problem, because it means that they either believe you don't care or you are incapable of solving their problems. And both is an issue. And so I think he has so many gold quotes on just leadership 101 that I really aspire to be a leader like him. Another leader, Abraham Lincoln. I know that's just kind of, hey, he's a big leader, whatever, but I mean the humility that that man had to put together a team of rivals through a very difficult time, lead towards this moral compass, this North Star of America that could be, not America that was, and just the tenacity that it took after failure, after failure, after failure, after failure, but to keep going on that path is just a really good leadership example to me.
Thank you. Yeah. My mom's getting 2 shout outs on this show. So, hey, mom, if you're still listening, I think she would answer that question the same way for Abraham Lincoln. She is just such a huge Lincoln fan. And when you do study his impact and his qualities, you really do just continually find like that level 5 leadership quality across
Yeah.
most of his life. And frankly, a legacy that I think we could all benefit from doing more of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I just to close out, David, I think I hope what people are taking away, because I'm taking away this is, and those are great examples of this, of a person as accomplished as you, who's done so much with their life, who's led in big ways and big companies and in intimate ways. You're always learning, right? And I see that in you,
Absolutely.
like that. I'm not a leader who leads because I tell you to. I'm a leader who leads because I want you to get better, so this can continue on. And we appreciate that. I know our listeners appreciate it, and just good luck with everything going forward. We hope to keep in touch. And so,
Absolutely.
thanks.
Appreciate you guys having me on.
Great, David. Really, it's been
I'm not Denzel Washington.
My man. All right. Good way to end. Thanks again to David Boelens for joining us. Until next time, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in-between.